Hello and welcome to the first ever ALP Podcast. I'm Chris Lower, Executive Vice President at ALP. On this show, I'll be speaking with professionals and experts in the fields of supply chain and logistics, as well as their relative industries, about their pain points, future trends, digitalization, and how to succeed in an ever-changing landscape. My first guest is Carl Hemus. Carl is the COO at TMX Global Asia, a leading business transformation consultancy that creates the digital and supply chain solutions of tomorrow. Carl has over 20 years of experience in change management, project management, operational analysis, solution design, transformation, and business development around the world. Carl, welcome, and thank you for being a guest on my first podcast.
Thanks, Chris. And I feel a little bit honoured to be the first guest, actually. So thanks for the invite. It's really nice to be here.
Great. Do you want to tell me a little bit about TMX before we start?
Yeah, sure. So, look, TMX is, I guess we class ourselves as an end-to-end supply chain consultant, right? But we use the word consultant very loosely because we're all about execution. So we're very much here as a project partner. You know, our history came from Australia and managing very large, complex builds in the supply chain arena, particularly around grocery and retail. But now very much we look at the Asia market in probably a few different lenses. People come to us for market insights and strategy work, how to come into this region or how to do better in the region. We do lots of work around continuous improvement, which is something I'm sure we'll talk about more this afternoon.
Absolutely.
Supply chain is our bread and butter. We know the supply chain industry. My resume is supply chain, and most of the people I work with is as well. And we have elements of that property and program management, project management here in Asia already as well. So really quite a wide suite of products that people come and talk to us on.
Oh, fantastic. Great, thanks. So, as you know, businesses across this sector are facing a lot of challenges now. From your perspective, what do you see being the biggest challenges?
It's a great question. I think the banner is disruption, right? And I know it's a word that's really heavily used, but disruption's coming in so many different forms now, and we're kind of almost post-pandemic now with China reopening just a week or so ago. That's going to be really interesting to see what happens. But the change that's come from that has really driven a lot of pain into the industry. And here, as you know, one of the major problems we have is with labour shortages, right?
Yeah.
People went away from the big cities and from the big companies during the pandemic and just haven't come back. And I think that's one of the large disruptions that we see, because we're a people-dependent industry, right? And that's where I think we see a lot of change coming, and the move towards automation is coming in a very different way now.
And I think also inflation is driving a lot of change.
Yeah, I think, look, this is, it's one of those numbers that keeps being thrown in the press, and I think very few people have a relative understanding to it other than, you know, my coffee cost $1 today and it cost me $1.50 tomorrow, right? But when you look at the operating costs that we carry as a supply chain industry, it has a material impact on how we do business, right? And again, labour cost is causing that to rise very, very quickly. Materials cost, building costs, land costs, just everything has gone up, right? So I think this is driving more change in the industry again. I talked earlier about our ability in optimization and continuous improvement. We're seeing a big request for people to be able to do better with what they have. So I'm not going to go build a brand new 300,000 square metre facility. I'm going to see what I can do with the one I've got. Yeah. And I think that leads probably to where you and I have spoken before, right, on what ALP is doing and what some of the other market players are doing to try and drive that.
Yeah. No, and I mean, it's, you know, it's the supply chain's become very fragile. You know, so
yeah, I think we were laughing the other day. One of the new phrases out there is forever fragile, right? Yeah. And I did have a bit of a wry smile at another buzzword, but I think it's true now, right? And I think the thing that the pandemic has done is it's actually driven people's interest in supply chain. You know, I don't know about you, but none of my friends ever want to speak to me about my job.
No, right? It's definitely the new buzzword of, I think 2022 and 23, it was, you know, supply chain.
Big time. All that toilet paper disappeared off the shelves, right? And suddenly people were like, oh, supply chain, it's broken, right? And I guess it is the net effect of what happened during the pandemic, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think, you know, there's more and more interest from companies to look at this from less of a cost perspective now and more of a value perspective, which I think materially helps our industry.
It's something I've been talking about a lot with clients is, you know, value. You know, I think we have a lot of times we talk purely, as you say, cost. You know, how much did it cost me to move that box from there to there?
Absolutely.
But, you know, when we start looking at value and you say, right, but what's the value of getting your product on the shelf? What's the value of not being out of stock in a convenience store or a supermarket? That makes the difference. Selling an extra 10%.
Totally.
Is far bigger than an extra percentage point on your supply chain cost.
Yeah, and look, I think for me it's really interesting because I've come from an operating base, right? Similar to you, I've worked for big 3PLs, I've worked for large organisations where the operation has been the operation, right? And nobody wanted to talk about it unless something went wrong. You're seeing COOs come to the table now. You're seeing chief supply chain officers come to the table as CEOs because companies are so concerned about this shift. And I think that translation even of value from what's my cost per hour on my labour to what's the value of having product on the shelf or product in front of my customers is really valuable again. But it's a valuable conversation for us to have, and I think is a very big change agent in the way we move forward.
I think it's interesting because, at least in my career, the C-suite were not interested in supply chain. I think that's changed in the last few years, and I think especially through the pandemic, suddenly now the CEOs and CFOs are actually talking about how do we invest in supply chain, how do we make it more robust, how do we improve its sustainability, right? These sorts of things have started to come to the forefront of the board table.
No, sorry, I'm smiling because I absolutely agree. Right?
Yeah.
With a dirty, grubby thing that sat outside the office, right, that nobody wanted to touch. And you only have to look at the profits that were made during the last 2 years by the big 3PLs, the shipping lines in particular, some of the airlines. They really made hay while that particular sun was shining, right? And I think that's what's piqued the interests of even the largest companies is they can't sustain those costs. They can't sustain those practices. We're now, I think, edging into the flip side of that. We've seen container prices dropping. We've seen, inventory costs going through the roof. You've seen supply costs going through the roof, unavailability of products in the store. It's broken, right?
Absolutely.
And I think this is a great time now for the big reset. What that quite means, I wish I knew, because then I probably wouldn't have to work for a living, but it will come. And more of the conversations we're seeing as a consultant are around the what if. And I think certainly we've seen a move away from what people will have heard referred to as just in time. So this is product being shipped across the world at the last minute. Yeah. So you're not holding inventory costs, you're not sitting on a large amount of expense, to just in case. And this is a dynamic shift in the industry because we're going back to having full warehouses. We're going back to having very large amounts of stock sat in different parts of the world. And that changes the cost model. And I think that's where automation is going to come into play. I think technology comes into play. More than ever, we're seeing data as the largest discussion, right? Yeah. And I think you've had that discussion with me more than once, right, on how we manage this thing.
Well, I mean, data is, it's the most important asset. It's how you can build a model, how you can look at how we can change. If you haven't got anything to back that up, you're kind of flying blind, really.
Yeah, which is the way supply chains ran, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Again, as we grew up through the industry, it was very much like, where is it? I'll go look for it and come back and find it, right?
Let me have a look at Excel.
That's a wonderful thing, a wonderful tool of Excel, right? I think visibility has become one of the major discussion points now, right? And that's in an end-to-end space. So people are actually interested in what's happening in the factory even now, and this is a new dynamic for them as well. As well as me sitting at home on my phone wanting to know where my driver is with my pizza, right? It's almost those two things are now interconnected. Data is at the heart of all of that, and I think data, my opinion here, not anybody else's, is that it's always been the weakest part of supply chain. As you say, we lived on Excel spreadsheets. We lived on people doing things on backs of beer mats in an office late at night and just making it happen. That's not good enough anymore. No. It did us at the time, and I grew up in that industry and I loved it because it was really seat of the pants stuff, right? We've seen now that can't cope anymore. This ability to have an end-to-end view of what's happening with your product, an end-to-end view of what's happening with your suppliers, your providers, your customers, is becoming more and more key.
And it's all feeding into like the S&OP processes and all of these. So, I mean, data drives a better supply chain, But I think we're still very new to this in a lot of companies.
I think a lot of the staff are as well. I think when you talk about labour shortage, one of the things that we're seeing now is there's a dynamic shift in the types of people coming into supply chain. You know, I came in straight from school because I didn't know how to do anything else. But now we're looking for data scientists. Can you imagine 10 years ago even talking about bringing data scientists into supply chain? Can you imagine talking about visualization of data and representative data? You know, I got into a discussion with one of our team about statistical models the other week. It lasted like 5 minutes, right? Because I'm just not in that space. So it's the other strain that's coming is the types of people we need are changing massively, right? And I think it's sitting behind it. It's amazing to watch. Sitting in the middle of it, it's quite scary.
It kind of leads on nicely to my next sort of question or topic. It's about automation, and I mean, I think this data plays plays a key point in this, because you know we see obviously a lot of companies now want to automate, but they've talked about automation for years, and it hasn't really happened, or it's happened very, very slowly.
Very slowly.
Data makes a big difference. If you want to automate your processes, you need to know what the processes are and how the volumes work through those processes. So, this is. So I guess my next question is, what are your views on automation and why has it taken so long?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think there's probably 3 parts to this, right? First one is obviously cost, and we talked about cost a little bit ago, right? We've got some of the lowest labour rates in the world in Southeast Asia and North Asia, right? So when a basic accountancy process takes place and you look at the cost benefit of spending 50 million on a facility, it normally gets thrown away immediately, right? And I think back in the day, this automation was also incredibly expensive. I mean, you look at the cost of putting a crossbelt sorter in to a facility a few years ago, it made people just run away. Right now, it's kind of a natural thing to do, right? So I think the pace that this automation and the technology that supports it has moved at is helping. The ability to produce it at a lower cost is helping. And also it's efficiency and its longevity, right? As you know, some of that kit we used to use, you were lucky if it lasted 2 years, right? Now it's pretty bulletproof in terms of the way it's deployed.
A lot of the automation of the past was like, let's say high levels of infrastructure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it was, I mean, still ASRSs are a good piece of equipment, but you look further down the process when you get to piece, sortation type solutions. You were looking at mini loads. You're looking at what else? Carousels.
The AGV birth has just been transformational.
It's absolute transformational.
And I think this is the second part, right? So people always looked at it as it's going to take a long time to learn. It's going to take ages for me to put into the building. I'm going to have to build my facility around it. The flexibility and the agility of this technology now is allowing it to be deployed in existing facilities with very little attention to the building itself. And it's become more user-friendly, right? You can implement an AGV relatively quickly compared to some of the old technology.
We're doing it in 3 months, and then a scale up maybe a couple of months afterwards. But I mean, it's super quick. You're looking at, mini load takes you, a year. And also you're dependent on the building shape, size, all these other.
And imagine that discussion even 5 years ago, right? Where it was unthinkable,
crazy.
Right? I think the third piece of it then, it comes back to some of the stresses from COVID, but the labour shortages have forced people to take a look at this. But I think also with the disruption and the change, the ability to become flexible in the supply chain is beyond just the human touch now. And I know this is something you and I talk a lot around in terms of facility design, but you can't just keep scaling with people anymore. Your efficiency is not there, your accuracy is not there. Machines don't need holidays. They don't go on tea break. No. They don't have.
They can run 24/7.
They can run 24/7. They don't have an argument with their wife and come into work and not want to do the job.
Exactly.
So I'm not saying it's a replacement, but what I'm saying is it's an enhancement right now. And I think when you hear people talking about the disruption of automation, I think it's actually, you need to sort of take 2 steps back and come and look at it, because it's actually enhancing the world as far as I'm concerned. And I think if you adopt it and you start to really understand its place in your set of processes, to go back to that, or in terms of your working environment, it has a role to play, right? For sure.
Well, where I see automation being really good is taking that complexity in operations and dealing with that. So, it's wrong to say, have the worker not have to think. I think that you want people to think, but you want them to think about easy processes, not think about, if I get red, blue, then I have to do this process. If I get red, green, blue, then... And this is how we used to run. I mean, I've been in operations where if a guy's off sick, basically that part of the operation does not happen
because Dave isn't in to do the red,
Dave's,
blue, right?
Dave's the only guy.
Yeah.
It's like the Marmite guy, right? So,
but I think also for me, the thing that I've seen in the last 5 years really is also this ability to have a practical application to technology. Now that's not just in automation, that's in this, my other favourite word, digitalisation, right? Is it means different things to different people, and it doesn't mean that you're going to have 5 people instead of 500. It doesn't mean that robots are going to take over the world. What it means is that we can use technology to help enhance that operation and replace the fact that people can go sick and we don't fall over. It means that we can become more efficient and we can take more work through a building that way. So we're actually creating work. We're creating volume space in organisations that didn't think they had it, right? And I think that's the practical application. It's not just come and bang it in, right?
And using those people to do better things in the warehouse, right? To for example, continuous improvement processes. All looking at the process at a more granular level. Where can we, make a difference? Which you didn't have before, right? Basically they just come into work, do the job, and at 5 o'clock they go home.
It's a really interesting point because I think it's that ability to upskill. And I think this is something I love. I'm 17, nearly 18 years in Asia now, right? The willingness for people here to upskill in the workplace is amazing, right? You go to Europe and it's like, oh, I'm not doing that. That's not my job. How dare you, right? I'll go talk to the union rep. Here, it's very much like, wow, can I learn something new? Can you, we've been introducing the basics of Six Sigma. So we've been using things like lean principles, the 5 S's, the real basics, and making it. Waste is the big one, right? Especially in some of the warehouses we see.
Yes,
but making that attainable and addressable to somebody and putting a whiteboard up in the middle of the shop floor with it written on, with them being able to, I can take that and go do it myself. That's where I see this real applicability, right? And I think that's where the upskill comes, because once you've done that, people are in a learning mode. Then layering in automation becomes actually quite simple.
Yeah, no, agree. So Carl, consumers are demanding far more variety and complexity in their orders, and obviously supply chains have to deliver that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, look, this is I guess e-commerce started this, right? And the forever aisle or endless aisle discussions that people have had for a long time now. I think the front end of it is the consumer, and consumer behaviour is driving a lot of this, everything from payment gateway to delivery methodology. The whole user experience, I think, has moved dramatically in the last 3 to 5 years. The net effect, as you said, is what happens in the warehouse, right? And what we refer to lovingly as pick face and order control and all those fantastic phrases that send people to sleep are having to shift.
There's a massive shift, right? I mean, from, it was B2B, it was general warehousing was picking cases. I mean, there was some piece picking for some products, but it was generally case picking. And now it's, individual units, it's small quantities, it's, 3-4 items per order, lots and lots of cardboard, packing.
Well, yeah,
goes
I think
on and on.
The environmental impact of this is probably a whole other discussion and another podcast, right? We'll be here all day otherwise. But certainly this, and we all do it, right? It's, I'll buy 2 of those, ship them to me tomorrow, right? And then no thought goes into how that's going to operate, right? And traditional warehouses were never geared to picking single units or picking eaches, as we refer to it sometimes. And I think around that, this is where automation comes back, right? And this is where I think I see some of the smartest solutions around material robot picking and material automated picking is in the smaller units. That's going to drive more change again, I think, as we go. It's not going to get any better. People are not going to start buying in caseloads of things all of a sudden. If nothing, I think with the recession, you're probably going to see it worsen again in this pick of what we do. So when you start to look at it, it's around this agility piece again. So how can I continually change my working space to meet the demands of my end customer? Because you can't fight with it. If the end customer's not buying, you're not shipping, right? So there's a material connection to this.
Those shifts, right? I mean, you see through the pandemic, we saw massive spikes in e-commerce volumes, and then post-pandemic, everyone wanted to get out of the house and go to the supermarket and buy.
Yeah.
And warehouses were struggling to meet that because they shifted somewhat towards the e-commerce and started to get their head around how to do that. And then suddenly they're getting case volume back in again.
Totally.
Right?
It's like, no, I've got to go back.
So,
I think some of it looks at the inventory control as well. And I think from a systems perspective, looking at inventory management systems going forwards, and they act very much as a go-between from the warehouse management system and whether it's a transport management system or however it goes out of the door. But that integer is really, really important now. And I think the agility of those systems and the understanding of how to deploy them goes back to data, right? So again, using the consumers, we've seen a lot of discussion around how do I collect the data from right at the front end. So even from POS, can I connect my POS all the way back into the warehouse so I understand what's happening? It's driven one of the really interesting developments, and it's here now as well, even in Thailand, is this dark store approach, right? So how do I take a tiny section of my big warehouse and put it where my customers are and shorten the delivery time, but shorten the range of products as well?
But I think it's automation that's helped us to get there as well, right? I mean, you talk about the inventory. I mean, the way I've seen traditional warehouses, if we've got a B2B and a B2C operation, is you have two separate inventories. You might have a bulk inventory elsewhere, but I've seen operations where it might take them 2-3 days to do the replenishment into the B2C part of the warehouse. But now with automation, holding that bulk inventory in an automated environment, it allows you to basically service those two areas very, very quickly. So replenishment can happen in, I won't say minutes, but
if there's an area of controversy
hours,
in our industry, single inventory is one of those that will spark a fight, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Every day.
Absolutely.
But I agree, and I think that's where the inventory management systems will really drive the efficiencies, right? Is if you're sitting on one lot of stock in one location and are able to segment that within the building, and then be able to direct that to customer need in the most efficient way possible. That's the future warehouse.
It's almost
right?
real-time inventory management, in the warehouse sense at least.
Yeah, I saw a company, where were they? I think it was out of India, that were actually monitoring stock in the truck itself. So they were doing real-time inventory, right? And I think some of those are the things we're going to see coming in the future.
And finally, what are the major trends do you see on the horizon for logistics and supply chain? That's a big question, I know.
Look, there's a few things happening that don't immediately get linked to supply chain, and again, it's this dislocation of actually what happens to my product when I want it to move somewhere, right? E-commerce, as you say, has gone through this huge flux off the back of the pandemic. It's starting to settle a little bit, but then there's some big disruptors out there like live sales, right? This ability to now sell product on TikTok or on Facebook or wherever you want to be. The numbers being driven out of domestic China, I think, were like 5 billion last year or something in sales for a cosmetics company. And when you talk about how on earth does that affect my warehouse, picking one item that someone has bought from an influencer online, this just drives complexity that nobody wants, right? But it's coming, and I'm talking to 2 startups that are working in this space at the moment, sort of doing some advisory work on how this links to the warehouse and how fine. It's a great marketing tool, but the knock-on effect is how you're going to get this product to customers. Those multi-channels, and it's been called omni-channel. I saw an omni-commerce channel, something. People are combining words at a rapid rate, right? But this continued growth of sales channels is something that's going to come through and affect us quite.
I think this is where, we're linking back to a previous discussion, but this is why digitalization and automation is so important. And and then to go back even further, this is why we can't just look at it at cost. It's being ready for the future, as well as having that flexibility and agility to adapt to what the market needs at that time. And the people that do it, they will be the real
they'll be the
winners.
ones at the front. Right? And look, you see it referred to as future proof or future ready, or any of those phrases apply. But understanding that horizon is becoming more and more important, and that's data driven, right? I think the other thing you'll see is this just continued adoption of technology and automation in different ways, in different environments. Warehouse control systems are something that are coming to the fore now. So how do I join all of this together to get it to do one thing well? That's going to, and the pace of movement in there is actually quite frightening now. And I think it's something to stand on top of.
There's actually a layer above that as well with the warehouse. We call it an execution system. I think there's, again, 1,000 different words, but it's almost the middle layer, but it's trying to orchestrate multiple control systems to bring it together.
It will.
I think most warehouse management systems, they can interface with automation, absolutely, but they're not orchestrating it. So
it's that orchestration, right? And I guess my final point on what's on the horizon is, and you and I laugh about this a lot, but it's the metaverse, right? And I know people look at it as Facebook's next thing, and Google are playing with it, but it's actually becoming very real. And we've seen some practical applications to this in what you've just explained, right? So what we're aiming to do is change the design process with it and allow people to virtually experience what they're trying to build before they've ever put, sort of a fork in the ground, for a phrase. And the thing that I think it will really change is this playing around with automation, right? So instead of trying to fit out a warehouse and do it, or do terrible mathematical calculations and present it back in Excel, imagine being able to put on the headset and actually watch that automation move and make changes in real time, then go and construct it. So you know what your end game's going to look like. I think the only problem with that is it's so quick to spin up in terms of a VR experience or a metaverse experience. The 2-year lag to then build it, the world's changed, right?
No,
so you're kind of trying to build 2 years ahead. But this application of things like the metaverse, virtual reality, augmented reality, it's around in spots at the moment. I don't think it's the finished article. We don't understand it enough yet. We're moving forward with it, but it will continue to change. The iterative process is very quick. So those are the things for me that will have big changes in the next 3 to 5 years, I think.
But I think you're right in this. I mean, the metaverse does definitely have some value in this space. I think everyone, when you hear the word metaverse, as you say, think Facebook, no legs, and lots of problems. But this actually has practical application.
I think so.
I think from my experience in sort of, let's say, adopting automation, just being able to see it running, even though it's it's not real, but with real volumes going through, you can start to say that doesn't look right, and that could be your data's wrong, so
exactly.
Somebody did a piece to case calculation incorrectly or something like this, but at least you see it, because it's easy when you walk into a warehouse to see the problems. But when you're looking at, as you say, thousands of Excel sheets, it just doesn't have the same feel. Right?
Yeah, I think it's really important as well, because we talked a little while ago in this conversation around where non-traditional supply chain people are now engaging. So you've got CEOs and CFOs that want to understand. They're never going to understand the process, but if you can walk them into a virtual facility that's going to do what you said it's going to do, that stakeholder management piece suddenly becomes a hell of a lot easier, right?
Yeah, good for business cases.
I hope so. Makes my life easier, right?
Well, thanks, Carl. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you for watching the first ever ALP podcast. We'll be back soon with more conversations with logistics experts on the biggest opportunities and challenges in 2023 and beyond. And if your business is considering smart logistics warehousing or automation, the ALP team and I are here to help.